The crystal chandelier above the gala's dance floor held 947 hand-cut pieces, each refracting the light of $1,000 evening. It was supposed to be decorative, not a weapon. The first sickening crack was a pistol shot through the string quartet's melody. As the massive fixture tore loose from the ceiling, one woman moved on pure instinct. She didn't run for the door. She threw herself over the 7-year-old girl in the diamond-encrusted dress, becoming a human shield as the sky rained glass and twisted metal. That woman was Ilara Vance, the quiet, overlooked nanny to the daughter of tech billionaire Alexander Thorne. For months, she'd been just another line item in his empire of security, a background figure in a life protected by armed guards and panic rooms. But in that split second of screaming chaos, she did what his $20 million annual security detail could not. Which raises the terrifying, life-altering question. What do you do when you discover the only person who would truly die for your child is the employee you barely noticed? To understand the magnitude of that moment, you have to see the world as it was just hours before. A world of meticulous order, where Ilara Vance was practically invisible. Her day began at 5:45 a.m., not with an alarm, but with the soft, programmed glow of her basement apartment's lights in the east wing of the Thorne estate. Her contract, 32 pages of non-disclosure agreements and liability waivers, designated her as a live-in domestic care specialist. Her domain was the third floor, the nursery, the playroom, and the private suite of 7-year-old Lily Thorne. Alexander Thorne's world was built on layers of separation. His main residence was a glass and steel monument on the hill, connected to the staff quarters by a 200-yard underground passage. Ilara entered the main house through a biometric scanner that logged her arrival. She was one of 42 full-time employees, but one of only 3 with unrestricted access to the air. The security briefing had been clear. "You are a caregiver, not a bodyguard," the head of security, a former Special Forces operative named Marcus, had told her. "Your sole focus is the child's developmental well-being. Threat assessment is our concern." The estate's perimeter had motion sensors, thermal cameras, and a quiet team of 12 who rotated in 8-hour shifts. The annual budget for this operation was, as Ilara had overheard, roughly the GDP of a small island nation. But all that security was designed to stop a threat coming from the outside. It never considered the danger already hanging from the ceiling. Ilara's connection to Lily was the one variable the security plans couldn't quantify. Research from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child shows that children can form profound, secure attachments with consistent, responsive caregivers. This wasn't just a job for Ilara. Lily's mother, Celeste Thorne, had died in a private plane crash when Lily was 3. The little girl, surrounded by luxury and surveillance, was emotionally marooned. Alexander, a titan of predictive algorithms, was hopeless at predicting his daughter's tears. He provided everything except the simple presence Ilara offered. Reading the same story twice, knowing how she liked her toast cut, understanding that the stuffed elephant named Bubbles was non-negotiable at bedtime. The morning of the gala was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The event was the annual fundraiser for the Thorne Foundation, a glittering 500-person affair under the estate's legendary glass-domed conservatory. Floral designers, caterers, and lighting technicians swarmed the grounds. For the first time, Alexander had insisted Lily make a brief appearance. "She needs to be seen," he'd stated. It was a decision that breached protocol. Marcus had argued against it, but Thorne's word was final. Ilara was tasked with preparing Lily and then, according to the evening's run sheet, retiring to the staff annex for the duration of the event. She was not a guest. She was part of the background machinery. As she helped Lily into a delicate dress, the little girl signed a question. Lily had been diagnosed with selective mutism after her mother's death, and while she could speak, she often chose not to. With Ilara, she used a blend of whispered words and signs they'd invented together. "Will you be there?" she signed, her eyes anxious. "I'll be right downstairs," Alara whispered back. "You'll be with your dad. You'll be so brave, and then we'll have hot chocolate after, just us." But an hour before the gala, Alexander Thorne did something unprecedented. He appeared at the nursery door, still in his dressing gown, his usually impeccable hair slightly disheveled. He looked at Alara not as an employee, but as if seeing her for the first time. "Lily is asking for you. She's nervous. I want you to attend. Stay with her. Keep her calm." Marcus, monitoring from the security hub, immediately radioed Alara's earpiece. "This is a deviation. You are not cleared for the guest list. Your profile is not in the facial recognition sweep." Thorne, overhearing, took the earpiece from her. "Marcus, add her. My daughter's comfort is the priority tonight." The line went silent. It was an order that overrode a decade of security doctrine. So Alara Vance, in her simple black dress, walked into the glittering conservatory holding Lily Thorne's hand. She was an anomaly, a caregiver in a sea of investors, celebrities, and diplomats. The security team tracked her with palpable tension. She felt their eyes, the subtle repositioning of bodies as she moved through the crowd with Lily. She noticed the chandelier. Everyone did. It was the centerpiece, a sprawling antique monstrosity of bohemian crystal that had been in Thorne's family for generations. It had been inspected, of course. The paperwork, filed and forgotten, stated it had been certified for load-bearing and fixture integrity just 6 months prior. But as the quartet played and champagne flowed, Alara's eyes kept drifting upward. A subtle, almost imperceptible shudder ran through the crystal teardrops. A fine dust sifted from the ceiling rose medallion above it. No one else noticed. No algorithm flagged it. The thermal cameras were scanning for concealed weapons, not structural stress. The motion sensors were aimed at the doors, not the fixtures. Lily, clinging to Alara's hand, signed, "It's too loud." Alara bent down. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart, then we'll go." That's when it happened. A sound like winter ice breaking over a lake, a single sharp crack from above. Every security instinct Marcus had was wrong. He barked into his radio, "Perimeter breach. Converge on the principal." His team moved toward Alexander Thorne. But Alara's instinct was different. It wasn't trained in a tactical course. It was wired into the very core of her attachment to the child in her care. She didn't look for the threat's origin. She only saw the danger descending toward Lily. As the massive chandelier plummeted, a constellation of lethal shards aimed at the dance floor, Alara Vance did the one thing the security plan had never accounted for. She sacrificed herself. In the screaming silence after the crash, two truths became horrifyingly clear. Lily Thorne was sobbing but unhurt, sheltered beneath a human shield. And Alara Vance was not moving, her back a tapestry of blood and crystal. The security team's failure was absolute. They had converged on Alexander, leaving the child exposed. It was Marcus who reached them first, his training overriding his shock. He didn't move Alara. He simply checked Lily's pulse, then barked into his radio, "Medic, now. Principal's child is secure, caregiver is critical." The word caregiver hung in the air, a gross understatement for the woman who had just performed an act of pure, uncompensated heroism. Alexander Thorne reached his daughter a second later, shoving through the debris. He gathered Lily into his arms, her tiny dress stained with another woman's blood. His eyes met Marcus, and in that glance was a seismic shift, a realization that his entire security paradigm was flawed. He looked down at Alara's still form, her face pale against the shattered marble. "Get her the best," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Now, nothing is to be spared." The next 72 hours were a blur of private hospitals, specialists, and legal triage. Alara had 17 deep lacerations, 3 fractured vertebrae, and a shard of crystal that had missed her lung by 3 millimeters. The medical bill for the first day alone exceeded $200,000. Under standard workers' compensation, her care would have been covered, but with strict limits and a fight. Thorne didn't invoke workers' comp. He simply paid, instructing his CFO to create a new line item, unconditional medical. But the financial cost was the least of his concerns. The real crisis was liability. As the research showed, household employers who fail to carry proper insurance face unlimited personal liability. Thorne had a policy, of course, but the insurance company's lawyers arrived within 24 hours, speaking of contributory negligence and assumption of risk. They argued that by placing herself in harm's way, Alara had violated safety protocols. Thorne listened for exactly 4 minutes before having them removed from the premises. He was not going to let a legal team blame the woman who saved his daughter's life. Instead, he turned his focus inward. He demanded the security footage from every angle, and that's when he saw it, not just the fall but the moments before. He watched Alara's eyes, not scanning the room for threats like his guards, but fixed on Lily. He saw her notice the dust falling from the ceiling, a detail every security sensor had missed. He saw her body tense a fraction of a second before the crack, her decision instantaneous. There was no calculation, no hesitation. It was biology, it was attachment. He watched the clip 117 times, and each time the same thought echoed. My security is designed to stop assassins, not to see a child. She sees my child. Meanwhile, in room 40, one of the exclusive Montclair Medical Center, Alara drifted in and out of consciousness. The first face she saw clearly was not Alexander Thorne, but a worried little girl's, pressing a drawing against the glass of her hospital room door. Lily, against all protocol, had been brought to see her. The child's first whispered word in over a year, heard only by a nurse, was Alara. The bond, documented by psychologists as a secure attachment, had now been forged in trauma. This presented a profound dilemma. Standard practice would have been to provide therapy and potentially sever the relationship to avoid re-traumatizing the child. But Thorne's lead psychologist advised the opposite. That woman is her anchor. Removing her now could cause more damage than the accident. So Alexander Thorne made a second unprecedented decision. He moved Alara's recovery to the estate. A full medical wing was activated in the guest house. He didn't ask her. He presented it as the only logical option for Lily's well-being. But privately, he was conducting an experiment. He wanted to understand the woman he had employed for 9 months and never truly seen. The first report to land on his desk was her background check, more detailed than the one performed before hearing. It told a story he hadn't bothered to learn. Alara Vance, age 28, parents deceased, put herself through community college studying early childhood development while working nights. Her last foster family had called her too quiet, too attached. She had no romantic partners, few friends. Her entire life was her work. She was, in essence, a person who had built her identity around caring for others because she had no one to care for her. This information should have been a red flag to a billionaire obsessed with risk. Instead, it fascinated him. Here was a person with no leverage, no agenda, whose only instinct was protection. In his world of contracts and incentives, she was an anomaly he couldn't price. 2 weeks after the accident, Thorne visited her in the guest house suite. She was sitting up, back braced, watching the garden. "The lawyers tell me I should be suing you," she said quietly, not looking at him. Thorne froze. "I would not blame you. They say your failure to maintain the fixture constitutes gross negligence, that I could own a piece of your empire." She finally turned her head. Her eyes were clear, free of bitterness. "I don't want your money, Mr. Thorne. I just want to know if Lily is okay." It was the answer he both hoped for and dreaded. It confirmed her character and simultaneously magnified his own debt, a debt that could not be repaid with a bonus or a promotion. It was a moral debt. "She asks for you every day," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. She spoke. She said your name." Alara's composure broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. In that moment, Alexander Thorne saw not an employee but the emotional core of his daughter's world. He made a third decision on the spot. When you are recovered, your role will change. You will no longer report to the household manager. You will report directly to me. Your priority is Lily's emotional security. You will have whatever resources you need. It was a promotion that blurred every professional boundary. Alara was now a de facto member of the family, with a salary that tripled and access that matched his own. The staff gossiped. The security team, led by a chastened Marcus, was ordered to treat her directives with the same weight as Thorne. And that's when the first anonymous email arrived in Thorne's private inbox. It contained a single sentence and a file. The sentence read, "The crystal wasn't tired, it was cut." The file was a schematic of the chandelier's mounting bracket with a microscopic analysis showing tool marks on the fractured metal, not stress fractures, clean, deliberate cuts. The chandelier hadn't fallen, it had been pushed. For a full minute, Alexander Thorne simply stared at the email. His entire reality recalibrated. This wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt. But the target wasn't him. The schematics showed the cuts were designed to make the chandelier fall directly onto the area where Lily was scheduled to stand for a photo op. His daughter was the target. The cold, algorithmic part of his mind engaged. He didn't call security. He didn't rage. He opened a new, encrypted window and typed a single command. It activated a protocol known only as Mirror. Every byte of data generated by his estate in the last 90 days began copying to a blind server he controlled. He then walked to his private safe, removed a burner phone, and made one call. To a man known only as the Architect, a security consultant who existed off the books and whose fees were paid in untraceable cryptocurrency. While the Architect began his remote autopsy, Thorne faced his immediate problem. The enemy was inside. The cuts on the bracket required access, time, and knowledge of the estate's routines. It meant a member of his staff, or one of the dozens of contractors, had been turned or planted. Marcus and his team were now potential suspects, not protectors. He implemented a silent lockdown. No one was fired, no one was confronted, but every employee's digital footprint was dissected. Financials, communications, movements. The paranoia was a tangible fog in the house. Only one person was exempt from suspicion, Alara Vance. Her actions were the definitive proof of her loyalty. More than that, she was now integral to the investigation in a way no one anticipated. Thorne needed to know every interaction, every odd glance she'd noticed in the days before the gala. Her perception, so different from his security team's, was a new data stream. He visited her again, this time with a tablet. He showed her the schematic. "Someone tried to kill my daughter," he said, his voice stripped of all billionaire bravado, leaving only a father's raw fear. Alara's reaction wasn't shock, but a grim confirmation. "The man from the lighting company," she said slowly. "He was in the conservatory for 3 days. He had a pass. But on the last day, he asked me what time the little princess would be coming through for her rehearsal." It was a detail so small, so human, it would never have been logged by security. A guard would have noted an authorized technician. An AI would have seen a credentialed face. Only a nanny, attuned to the subtle creep of someone overstepping, would have registered it as a threat. This single lead became the thread Thorne pulled. The lighting technician, a man named Evan Shaw, had impeccable credentials and had passed 2 background checks. But the architect, digging from the shadows, found the ghost in the machine. Shaw's identity was a composite, a skilled forgery. The real Evan Shaw had died in a hiking accident in Colorado 2 years prior. The man in Thorne's home was a phantom. The investigation pivoted from negligence to corporate warfare. Thorne's company, Thorne Predictive Systems, was weeks away from launching a quantum encryption module that would render most corporate and government surveillance obsolete. The stock of 3 major data mining firms had dipped on the rumor alone. The attempt on Lily's life wasn't personal revenge. It was a message, a way to destabilize Thorne, to shatter his focus, or to force him into a vulnerable, emotional decision. The legal ramifications exploded. The workers' compensation case was now a criminal investigation. The police, the FBI, and Thorne's own shadow team descended. Reporters swarmed the gates. The story of the heroic Nanny was now intertwined with a tale of industrial espionage and attempted murder. Ilara was no longer just an injured employee. She was a material witness who had thwarted a capital crime. This exposure placed her in a new kind of danger. If the rival entity knew she could identify their asset, she became a liability to them. Thorne's solution was to deepen her integration into his family's core. Officially, she was moved to the main house for ongoing medical care and child support. Unofficially, she was placed in the safest room, next to Lily's. Her world contracted to a gilded prison of heightened security. The psychological toll on both women was immense. For Lily, the secure attachment was now tinged with anxiety. She would panic if Ilara left her line of sight. For Ilara, the trauma of her injuries was compounded by the knowledge that the violence was intentional. The research on workplace trauma indicates that recovery is hampered when the incident is malicious, not accidental. Her heroism had a darker, more sinister echo. Thorne watched this bond, this fragile ecosystem of trust and fear, and it changed him. He began to spend real time with them, not as a CEO visiting a department, but as a participant. He'd sit in the playroom during Lily's therapy sessions. He heard Ilara explain things to Lily in simple, honest terms he couldn't muster. He saw a model of strength that wasn't about control, but about presence. One evening, he found Ilara in the library, staring at a legal document. It was a settlement offer from Thorne's own lawyers, a 7-figure sum, full medical for life, and a sealed NDA that would require her to leave and never contact the Thornes again. It was the clean solution, the way billionaires make problems disappear. "They gave this to you," he stated, his voice cold. "They said it was for my own good. That staying here was a risk," she replied, not looking up. "Do you want to leave?" The question cost him something to ask. She finally met his gaze. "She needs me. And I think you know I'm the only person here who isn't afraid of you. That might be valuable." In that moment, Alexander Thorne made the most illogical, non-algorithmic decision of his life. He tore the settlement papers in half. "Then you stay, not as staff, not as a witness, as family." He used the word deliberately, knowing its legal vagueness and emotional weight. He was offering her a status with no precedent, no contract. It was a declaration of trust that bypassed all his usual defenses. But this decision created a seismic rift in his empire. His board got wind of it. The CFO argued about unprecedented liability and emotional governance. The security team, led by a humiliated Marcus, saw it as a catastrophic vulnerability, an emotionally compromised outsider with unparalleled access. The household staff whispered about the nanny who was becoming the queen. The pressure built until it cracked during a board meeting. Thorne was presented with an ultimatum: sever the unprofessional relationship with the caregiver and allow a managed security team to handle Lily's welfare, or face a vote of no confidence. They cited the research themselves, twisting it. Attachment is one thing. Dependence on a single point of failure is a catastrophic security risk. Thorne stood, his silence more powerful than any outburst. He looked at the faces of the men and women he'd made rich. "You are confusing assets with people," he said quietly. "My daughter is not a liability to be managed, and the woman who saved her life is the only asset on my balance sheet that has proven its true value." He walked out, leaving $1 billion in market cap trembling in his wake. That night, as he stood in the hall outside Lily's room, he heard Ilara's voice through the door, singing a quiet lullaby. He leaned against the wall, a man who commanded satellites but felt utterly helpless. He realized the conspiracy against his family had succeeded in one way. It had shown him that his money, his technology, his power were all useless against the darkness. The only light he had was the one he'd almost thrown away. He made a final, irreversible choice. He would not just defend. He would rebuild his entire world around this new, fragile core of trust. And to do that, he needed to know who had tried to destroy it. The answer, when it came, was not from a shadowy corporation or a rival CEO. It came from inside the one place he thought was still sacred, the family itself. The family wasn't a blood relative. It was Marcus. The head of security, the man Thorne had trusted with his life for a decade, had been the architect of the plot. Not for money, but for what he saw as the ultimate protection of his principal. The architect's final report was a psychological autopsy. Marcus had not been bribed. He had been manipulated. A rival firm had fed him fabricated intelligence over months, suggesting Alara Vance was a sleeper agent, a long-con plant designed to get close to Lily. The evidence was clever forgeries, doctored photos of Alara meeting with known corporate spies, fake chat logs, a fictional tragic backstory engineered to elicit sympathy. They preyed on Marcus's deepest professional fear, the insider threat he couldn't physically stop. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Marcus, convinced he was saving Thorne from a future greater betrayal, had arranged the accident to eliminate Alara and, tragically, Lily if necessary. He believed he was cutting out a cancer before it metastasized. The phantom lighting technician had been his asset, given access through his authority. When Alara survived, Marcus saw it not as a miracle, but as a catastrophic failure of the mission. Thorne confronted him in the security hub. He didn't bring guards. He simply played the evidence on the main monitor. Marcus didn't deny it. He stood at attention, his face a mask of twisted duty. "I was protecting you, sir, from a threat you were too emotionally compromised to see." "You tried to murder my child," Thorne said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "I was neutralizing an asset of a hostile entity. The child was collateral in a war you refused to acknowledge." In that moment, Alexander Thorne understood the true cost of the fortress he'd built. He had created a system so paranoid, so detached from human connection, that it could rationalize infanticide as a tactical necessity. He had Marcus arrested not by corporate security, but by the FBI. The criminal case now had a name and a confession. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Thorne's board, terrified of the liability and the headlines, demanded he accept their earlier ultimatum. They presented him with a new ironclad contract for Alara's severance. He didn't argue with them. He called a special shareholder meeting and did something unprecedented. He dismantled his own empire. He announced he was stepping down as CEO of Thorne Predictive Systems, ceding control to the board, and taking the quantum encryption module, the source of all the conflict, fully off the market. He would license the patents to a non-profit consortium dedicated to privacy rights. The company's stock plummeted 20% in after-hours trading. He had voluntarily surrendered $1 billion in personal wealth to remove the target from his family's back. With the external threat neutered, he turned to the internal wreckage. The estate was emptied of all staff. The sophisticated security system was decommissioned. He sold the main house. He moved with Lily and Alara to a secluded, unassuming property on a remote coastline. There were no guards, no scanners, no safe rooms. There was just a house by the sea. Alara's recovery was long. The physical scars healed into fine, pale lines. The psychological ones were deeper. She suffered from nightmares, from a flinch at sudden noises. But in the quiet of the new house, with Lily's constant, quiet presence and Thorne's now undivided attention, a different kind of healing began. The research on heroic trauma suggests recovery is anchored in community and purpose. She had both. Her legal status remained intentionally ambiguous. She was not an employee. Thorne had his lawyers establish an irrevocable trust in her name, funded sufficiently that she would never need to work again. But she didn't leave. The attachment between her and Lily had solidified into something unbreakable, a secure base from which the little girl finally began to speak, to laugh, to move beyond the shadow of grief and terror. A year after the gala, on a cool autumn evening, Alexander Thorne found Alara on the porch, watching Lily chase sandpipers on the beach below. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was not jewelry, but a key and a single sheet of paper. "The house in the village," he said. "It's yours, fully deeded. No strings. It's 5 minutes from here. You can stay with us or go there or go anywhere. This is to ensure you are with us only because you choose to be, not because you need to be." Ilara looked from the key to the man who had once been her boss. The billionaire was gone. In his place was a humbled, fiercely devoted father. "And if I choose to stay here," she asked. "Then we would be the luckiest family on earth," he replied. She closed the box but didn't take the key. She left it on the table between them. "I'll stay, but I don't need a house to know I'm free." That was the final, surprising pivot. The ultimate protection wasn't a contract, a wall, or a weapon. It was the voluntary, unenforceable choice of a woman who had every reason to walk away, but chose to stay. In the end, Alexander Thorne didn't buy her loyalty. He created the conditions where it could be freely given, and in doing so, finally earned it. The legal and financial threads were tied off. The rival firm was sued into oblivion with evidence provided by a cooperating Marcus. The workers' compensation case was closed with a landmark settlement that included funding for a nonprofit advocating for domestic workers' rights and insurance. Ilara Vance's name became synonymous with both sacrifice and the changing conversation about the value of caregiving labor. But the real resolution was quiet and personal. In the new house by the sea, the three of them built a life not on fear but on a hard-won trust. Lily grew stronger. Alexander learned to be present. And Ilara, the woman who had been invisible, became the central pillar of a family she saved in more ways than one. The chandelier's fall didn't just shatter crystal, it shattered a worldview, and from the pieces, something fragile and real was finally built. So what does this story of a billionaire, a nanny, and a shattered chandelier actually reveal? On one level, it's a dramatic tale of betrayal and unexpected heroism. But on a deeper, more universal level, it's a stark case study in value. We live in a world that meticulously prices everything. We quantify security in dollars per year, calculate liability limits, and insure assets against every conceivable loss. Alexander Thorne did all of that. He paid for the best his money could buy. Yet, the thing that ultimately protected his most precious asset had no line item in his budget. It couldn't be purchased. It could only be earned through consistency, attention, and a selflessness that defies transactional logic. The research we cited at the beginning wasn't just background. It was the blueprint Ilara Vance followed instinctively. Secure attachment, the kind that fosters resilience in a child, isn't created by panic rooms or armed guards. It's built in the quiet, repetitive, often invisible acts of care. By knowing how a child likes her toast. By understanding the sacred importance of a stuffed elephant named Bubbles. By being present. Thorne's fortune could buy a child everything except the one thing she needed most after her mother's death, a secure emotional base. Ilara, with her modest salary and her vast heart, provided it. The attempted murder, the corporate espionage, the staggering legal fallout, those were the fireworks. But the real revolution happened in the quiet aftermath. A billionaire realized his entire metric for measuring what mattered was flawed. He learned that true security isn't about building higher walls, but about recognizing and honoring the human connections already within them. He discovered that the person he'd categorized as staff was, in fact, the cornerstone of his child's world and by extension, his own. This story forces an uncomfortable but vital question. Who are the Ilara Vances in our own lives? Not just nannies, but the quiet, essential people whose value we fail to see because their work isn't flashy, because they don't demand attention, because they are simply there. The teacher who sees a struggling student, the nurse who offers a moment of compassion, the neighbor who checks in. We live in ecosystems of care we often take for granted until a crisis reveals their true architecture. Alexander Thorne's journey wasn't from wealth to poverty, but from blindness to sight. He traded a fortress for a home, a corporation for a family, and a balance sheet for a bond that could never be broken. In the end, the most sophisticated system he ever engineered was the one he didn't build with code, but with trust. The glass was swept away, the wounds healed, the conspiracy was unraveled, but the lesson remains clear and sharp as crystal. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't the one you pay for. It's the one you almost overlook. Look around you. Who's yours? If this exploration of the unseen forces that truly protect us resonated with you, I invite you to join this channel. We delve into the hidden architectures of power, loyalty, and the human connections that shape our world. Your subscription helps bring more of these stories to light. Thanks for watching.